Will Derby County be able to stop their losing run as they head to Norwich City in a very important game for the tenure of Paul Warne? Derby County are on a run of 4 wins in 26 games, 8 losses on the bounce, and with a lack of investment in the first team squad throughout the month of January and a whole host of injuries stacking up, Derby County look to be in a worse position than they were starting off. Now, obviously, we're going to talk about all the caveats of Derby County, and we're going to talk about Norwich City, some of the injuries and suspension they face, and their recent form. There's some big questions to be asked of Paul Warne, David Clowes, and the recruitment team at Derby, but who is going to take the mantle? Who is going to sort of stand up and actually say something to the fans? We don't know right now, and that's something that we're waiting for. I've waited as long as I physically can to be able to have time to edit this video and get it out for tonight. It's currently 20 past 3 as I'm recording this, and there's no pre-match presser been dropped, not even any snippets from the likes of Lee Curtis or Dom Dietrich, which is very, very disappointing for 3:15 on a Thursday. It's normally well out by now. Now, obviously, if we just take a quick look into the two sides, injuries and suspensions for Norwich City, they're missing Sainz, Nunes, Gibbs, Forsyth, Slimani and Forson. Some players there in that list who are massive misses. Sainz, the major one, I believe he's their top goal scorer, and he's up there in the charts for their top assister as well. Very, very good player, so it's obviously a good thing for Derby County that he's missing. We then move on to the Derby County injury list. You've got Corey Blackett-Taylor, Curtis Nelson, Dejon Brown. There's some fitness concerns around David Ozo, but that was obviously from the last game where he came off. But is he going to be okay? I think he will be, but we'll obviously have to wait and see. There's obviously continuous injuries to Kane Wilson. Nat Phillips was rumoured to be back on the grass at the start of this week, but obviously, as I've not heard from Paul Warne, no confirmation on that. Callum Elder, obviously, he was out as well, and Ben Osborne, obviously, those fitness concerns that he's had across the course of the entire season. Now, if we do just take a brief look at the league table for both of the two sides, Norwich City currently sit in 8th place. They're 2 points outside the playoffs. Derby County sit in 22nd, 2 points away from safety. Now, both teams have different goals towards the end of this season, and both teams have different goals on the grand scheme of things in general. Derby County fighting for survival, and really, people will say fighting for their lives, but I ultimately don't necessarily agree. Norwich City fighting for a chance at promotion, a chance at getting back to the big time and being in that Premier League conversation. Now, if we look at the last 5 games, obviously you already know the answer for Derby County. It's 5 defeats in a row. That stretches back all the way 8 games and could potentially be 9 after this weekend. Norwich City are coming into this game off the back of 2 back-to-back wins, beating Watford and Swansea. Watford was a 1-0 win, Swansea was 5-1. They did face losses to Leeds, Sheffield United and Brighton in that recent 5 games, but they have picked up some form in the last couple. Now, for me, the difficult talking point about this, and it's a reason why you can't really look at head-to-heads, is because of the massive disparity between the clubs now. Now, Derby County and Norwich used to be sort of 2 of those clubs that were sort of always in, when they were in the division, were always in that sort of promotion battle, let's say. Obviously, there's only a few seasons since 2013-14 where Derby County weren't in that promotion fight. Obviously, towards the back end of that, there was obviously those situations where Derby County were in the relegation battle and things like that for specific reasons, maybe not purely performance based, but that's a different story. Now, if we do look at the head-to-head, it's 5 wins for Norwich, 4 draws and 4 wins for Derby County. So it is normally a close encounter between these two sides, and I think a lot of you will probably remember one of Derby's most recent wins. I say it's one of their most recent wins. It was probably like 2019 maybe, where Derby County were at Norwich, the lights broke, and I think it was Fikayo Tomori who scored a late winner. I think Jack Marriott scored as well, and Florian Josefsson. Obviously, we have beat them since then. I believe it was a Wayne Rooney free kick under Philip Cocu, not long before Philip Cocu got sacked, actually. So we've had those moments against Norwich, and it'll be interesting to see going into this one how Derby County can turn it around. Now, if we want to look at Norwich City and their main problems, right, that Derby County are going to have to face and going to have to defend against, you've got to talk about Borja Sainz, you've got to talk about Sargent, you've got to talk about Doyle. Now, obviously, the big conversation will be Sainz is missing, which is obviously a major boost for Derby County. As per FOTMob, he is out suspended. So it's one of those for me where that 15 goals that he provides, I believe he scored a hat-trick against us earlier in the season, is a really, really interesting one for Derby County to have to deal with, because then you've got to put more focus in other areas, and they've got some really, really good players. And it's one of those for me where I think ultimately Derby County are in that position where teams aren't really having to get out of first gear, second gear to be able to beat us. And that's sort of my big disappointment with Derby County recently, is even if you go as far back as the Wayne Rooney season when we was in administration, even though we had a team of freebies, academy grads, and obviously a sprinkle of Tom Lawrence, really, it was one of those situations where we always seemed to try and go toe-to-toe. We tried to play, we tried to win, and that was something really good about that season, which sort of had a galvanising effect on the fan base, and we don't seem to have that under Paul Warne. Now, let's talk about the new signings for Derby County, and let's sort of see where they could fit in. Now, obviously, Derby County have brought in Sandre Langas, Selverson, Harrison Armstrong, and Matt Clark. And in my opinion, Langas, Selverson, Clark, good signings. They will be good signings for Derby County. Armstrong, I can't really give a true reflection on because I don't know that much about him. Now, I may have seen him play a few times when watching the academy, or when our academy teams played Everton back in the year I was at the academy, but ultimately it's not a name that I'm necessarily familiar with. I know he's made a few senior appearances for Everton already this season, but it's one of those for me where I'm just not entirely sure how that deal works, when he doesn't trust our own youngsters in the building, but he's now brought in an 18-year-old who is in the same situation as they are, really. So this is one of the reasons why I wanted to wait for Paul Warne's press, because I wanted to see what he had to say about the transfer window. Now, there was some murmurs over Twitter. I say murmurs, I think there was just one or two tweets from people saying that Paul Warne's gone. Now, ultimately, there's been no official announcement, so we take that with a pinch of salt. And obviously at the time, I replied to the guy and told him that I hope his source is legitimate and not HP. And it's just one of those situations for me where you look at the signings we've brought in, I don't think we've brought in enough. I think Paul Warne is going to be frustrated with the transfer dealings we've had, especially being unable to bring in a wide player or anything like that. And it's really interesting that we're just talking about Paul Warne, because there has now just been a tweet from Dom Dietrich. I believe he was replying to somebody where he said the press was at 2 o'clock today, which is quite late for Derby County. It's normally done early morning, and we normally have it by 2 o'clock. So it's one of those where I'm not going to have listened to it or heard it before this video goes live, well, before I've finished this video, sort of thing. So it's just one of those. We'll just deal with it tomorrow. I'll drop a video sort of tomorrow morning, maybe. We'll see, depending on what time it drops. But it's one of those for me where Derby County never brought in enough players, and it's a consistent battle that we've seen. And when talking and hearing from Rotherham fans, they say this is a consistent theme. The transfer window, you're always wanting X, you're always wanting Y, you're always wanting Z, but never end up getting it. And there's a lot of talk about bodies coming in and having conversations, but nothing ever seems to get done. And it's the same when it comes to the injury front. Apparently, according to some Rotherham fans, whenever they were in the Championship, their injuries were through the roof. But when they were in League One, everyone seemed to be fit. Now, I think I'm not necessarily going to talk on behalf of players here, but when I used to play, and obviously I was never sort of in an academy or anything like that properly or anything like that, but it was one of those where it was the situation of when you were winning consistently, everyone was fit, everyone was available, everyone turned up to training, everyone played, everyone was available for games, didn't matter how far away it was or anything like that. Whereas when you were losing, it felt as if players would sort of drop out. Oh, I've got an injury. Oh, I can't make training this week. And I'm not saying that's what's happening at Derby, but I do think that even as a first team professional footballer earning thousands of pounds a week like they will be doing at Derby County, you still have that morale hitter which I think then leads into not preparing properly, not getting ready for games properly, and that then puts you in a situation where you pick up those injuries. And when morale is low, if you can't pick it up correctly, you end up in a shit situation, and that's where I feel Derby County currently find themselves. Now, obviously, you're all willing to have your own opinion. I'd love to hear your opinion down in the comments, but I've got some big opinions on the topic of communication and things like that. Now, obviously, as I just mentioned, and as I've mentioned throughout this video, the press has not been released as I'm recording this. Dom Dietrich has just put out a tweet saying that it was done at 2 o'clock, so when that will be released, I don't know. That tweet was 9 minutes ago, so we obviously, I haven't heard anything yet. I'll probably put something together for tomorrow morning about that, and maybe something for the evening in regards to the game on Saturday. But I think when we're talking communication, we're talking things like that. The rumours, well, I say the rumours, BBC Radio Derby have sort of put forward that they've been requesting to speak to David Clowes or Stephen Pearce across the course of this transfer window, and even before the transfer window, as we was in sort of a tough run of form, to get sort of an explanation as to why they backed Paul Warne, and obviously now it would be an explanation into why the transfer window was a failure, because ultimately it is a failure, because if we get 2 or 3 injuries, we're sort of in the shit again, because we've not really strengthened. We've just replaced bodies that have gone out the door because of injury or suspension or sales, sorry, because Lars Jørgen Salverson essentially replaced James Collins leaving, Langash replaced Curtis Nelson, Clark replaced Erin Cashin, Armstrong is sort of the only one that's really an extra body, but I don't really think is necessarily what we needed, although Paul Warne did mention a few times that we needed a central midfielder. But obviously, with that lack of communication from those people upstairs, you go back to the statement put out by David Clowes, which realistically has really come to bite him on the arse, talking about those other promoted teams wanting to swap places with us. Well, now what is the situation? We want to swap places with them, and that's sort of the situation we find ourselves in now, and it is down to those decisions made from those upstairs, and they haven't explained it, and I understand that they don't have to explain every decision they make, but ultimately they don't. They make thousands of decisions every week that we'll never hear about, we'll never even know were decisions that were even made, and that's sort of the conversation that has to be had when you're talking about this, because they make loads of decisions. We don't need explanations on every decision, but when a manager has lost 8 in a row, and I personally believe that by this time next week we'll be looking ahead to QPR off the back of 10 defeats in a row. That's how I feel based on the performances I've seen and the situation we find ourselves in. I can't see us picking anything up against Norwich nor against Oxford, and then obviously there's QPR next Friday, which is obviously a massive game. And it just is really disappointing, the situation we find ourselves in, and the fact that there has been no communication, because we were told when David Clowes came in that there would be open dialogue, transparency and consistency, and in complete honesty, I think throughout the whole time Clowes has been in charge, I think he's probably spoke 3, maybe 4 times, and I don't necessarily think there is openness. I don't necessarily think there is transparency, because do you know why Paul Warne has been kept or held on to? Do you know why he's been backed? No one does, because that information hasn't been put out. People, even when you go back to last season under in League One, when the decision was made to back him then, the situation was never sort of clarified as to why. And for me, I think a lot of the time people are sort of leading on blind faith of David Clowes because he's supposed to be a Derby County fan. Now, I'm not going to say he isn't or he is. Obviously, he has had season tickets. He has been to games for years. But I think there's a lot of people that have been to games for years that aren't necessarily fans. And I know that sounds weird to say, but I can't really explain what I mean. But I know loads of people that do things just because they fall into it and it becomes habit. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying David Clowes isn't a Derby fan, isn't a football fan. Like, clear that out your minds. That isn't what I was saying. But it's one of those for me where sort of the honesty, openness and transparency hasn't ever come through, apart from in his pre-season interviews where both years he said we've had competitive budgets. This season, I don't necessarily agree that it's been a competitive budget. I do think we've got a good enough squad to stay up, but I don't think it's a competitive budget. Last season, we obviously had a competitive budget. If we didn't have a competitive budget in League One, I'd have been absolutely baffled by the fact that we make more money off ticket revenue than most teams probably make the entire season. So it's one of those for me where it's always a difficult conversation to have. Now, will that communication come in this press conference which Dom has held today? Probably not. I think we'll hear the same sort of answers. The team were working really hard, just couldn't quite get the right deals done. Players didn't quite fit what we were trying to do, things like that. And Paul, I can already sort of hear in my head, I can already hear the voices of Paul Warren going, we just wanted the right fit for the squad. I'm really happy with the squad we've got. I needed the right fit. I needed the right fit, the right person. No, we needed quality in the door. And that is the situation we find ourselves in. And it's the situation that we didn't complete. And it's one of those where now it's, a 16-game run to the end of the season. I'm just going to check that that's right. 16-game run to the end of the season, maybe 17 at a push. And Derby County are 2 points away from safety with some big games coming up. Some big games. Oxford 10 points ahead of us. We've got them. QPR, they are bloody hell, where are QPR? They're like 15 points ahead of us now. You've obviously then got Millwall, who are in and around that QPR range, and obviously then Middlesbrough, who are sitting in that playoff position. So obviously you can let me know your thoughts down below. If you have not done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on that notification bell, hit the like button as well. I'll catch you in the morning with a video all about Paul Warren's press conference. Obviously unable to catch that before this one could go out. So yeah, let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll catch you in the next one.